Hello and welcome dear viewers to the video on setting specification for known, unknown and total impurities for release and shelf life. The video is regarding specification for impurities at the release stage and at the shelf life stage for the formulation. Many of the professionals find this topic difficult and may have questions. Many of the people ask about the techniques or the practice for setting the specifications. So this video will be very interesting for those people, and also as a pharmaceutical professional we should understand how to set the specifications for the drug product, also for the drug substances. One of the most important for pharmaceutical formulation is the safety and efficacy. So as impurities may be toxic in nature, and if the impurity are above the threshold limits, that time those impurities will have a toxic effect, or due to higher impurity limits the safety of the product may get compromised. That's why impurity specification is very important. Regulatory authorities are very stringent onto the impurities, and day by day more stringent limits are being proposed or asked by the regulatory authorities. So let's start with the video, and after watching this video you will be able to view the specifications for the impurity. So we will start little bit with the basics. So the product quality is required to ensure its safety and efficacy. Impurity are those component or any component of the new drug product or a drug product that is not the drug substance or an excipient in the drug product. Mainly the impurities are called as organic impurities, related substances or degradation products. So generally for USP, the organic impurity is the terminology used, and related substances is the terminology used for the other regions. Some of the organizations or applicants use related substances or degradation products for the impurities. The meaning of all these things is same, and generally the impurities are related to the drug substance. This video will not discuss regarding the impurities like residual solvents, elemental impurities, nitrosamines, genotoxic impurities and any other impurity. Only the organic impurities will be discussed which are related to the drug substance. The impurities may come from the synthesis as raw material or starting material may be contaminated with impurities or may contain impurities. Then the process. So intermediates may become the impurities if not purified. Then on storage, the drug may get degraded and may give rise to presence of impurity. Interaction with the environment like temperature, humidity, oxygen, or interaction with the raw materials, excipients, and the container closure which is in the immediate contact may be responsible for the generation of impurity. So these are the type of these are the different type of sources for specific impurities. The organic impurities may be classified as process impurities, degradant impurities, or some impurities may be process as well as the degradant impurities. So this is the very important part to understand. process impurity from the API, degradant impurity from the API. Some impurities may also be process as well as degradant. So process impurities are coming from the API, and mainly the degradant impurities are formed due to the interaction with the excipient and due to the manufacturing process of formulation or during the storage. The impurity types may be starting materials, reagents, ligands, catalysts, intermediates, byproducts for some of the times. These may be from the degradation products. These may be geometric or stereoisomers like chiral impurities. So impurities may come from the starting materials or from the process. If you are going to make the formulation, that time these process impurities, degradant impurities or process plus degradant impurities come from the APIs. The impurities which come from the excipients are generally nullified as the placebo interference is checked, and these are not much more in the quantity, and these are disregarded. So we have to focus onto the degradant impurities which may increase in the formulation. So whenever you want to make the specification for your drug product, that time the first step you should follow is to make a list of all the impurities. For example, if you are working on diclofenac, you are working on diclofenac tablet, whatever the API you are using, diclofenac sodium or potassium or base, whatever you are taking as a API, first of all you should check the API COA and make a list of individual and total impurity. Then check the API DMF, and in DMF section the impurity list is given. So from there you understand the structure and name, how the API vendor or DMF holder is controlling the impurities, what specification is given by them. Then check the monograph for API. If API monograph is available, check all the pharmacopoeias for the impurities. List down the monographs and the impurities enlisted and specified by the monograph. Whether it is Indian pharmacopoeia, British pharmacopoeia, European pharmacopoeia, Japanese pharmacopoeia or US pharmacopoeia. Then check the monographs for product. If the product is approved, then the monograph will be there. If the product is not approved, then also check the other products approved in the any region and if any monograph is available. If you are working on tablet formulation of diclofenac, but the monograph has capsule product, the capsule product is approved and monograph is there for capsule product, so you can refer that capsule products monograph. Then check the reference product impurity profile. Once you have method in your hand for related substances, check the impurity profile of the reference product or innovator product or comparator product. Sometimes it is also denoted as RLD. So check that and make a list. Then also check how many formulations are available with the same drug, whether it is tablet, capsule, suspension or other products. Different formulations of the same drug with combinations with other drugs. So these literature search or these activities in the literature search will give you in-depth understanding about the impurities. How many impurities are there? what are the general limits, and how these impurities are formed. So check the degradation pathway or impurity formation pathway for these impurities. How these impurities are being formed. What are the precautions are required to be taken to control these impurities? What is the packaging system of the reference product? If the reference product is using any packaging system to protect it from light, then somewhere somewhat impurity may be being formed by the light. That means the impurity may be formed because of the photodegradation. Then check the force degradation of API and perform force degradation of the test formulation. Impurity data of test formulation stored at higher temperatures like 50 degrees, 60 degree or 70 degree for some days like 7 days, 15 days, 30 days. These are the exercises to be performed to have understanding about the product behavior. Then check the excipient compatibility data. Whether any impurity is being found with specific excipient. Some of the APIs form adduct type of impurity with some excipients like mannitol. Some APIs are not stable with acidic or basic excipients. So you will find the impurities, possible impurities, whether any impurity is getting increased. Sometimes the process impurity of the API may become degradant during the excipient compatibility. Then check the product stability at different storage conditions. Then check product stability with different packagings like blister, bottle or open condition. Check the presence of genotoxic impurity, nitrosamine impurity, chiral impurity and presence of any impurity which is also a metabolite. So based on the impurity type like genotoxic impurity, nitrosamine impurity or the presence of any impurity which is also a significant metabolite, you can give separate criteria for that. So all these informations are must and all these information should be in hand whenever you are going to give impurity specification. Without thorough understanding of the impurities and product behavior, the impurity specification should not be given, because once you give the impurity specifications, whether you give it too wide or too stringent, it will hamper the product. It will hamper the regulatory approval process. Regulatory agencies will not be in a condition to give approval for such type of products for which the impurity justifications are not enough. So know your product behavior and then only give the specification. Then determine the impurity specification limits based on the scientific guidelines. ICH guideline is there, which is Q3B, and it gives the complete information about the thresholds for reporting, identifying and qualifying the impurities. Determine the threshold for known and unknown impurities as per the guideline. And whenever you are going to give a specification, first step is to have the list of impurities, then have maximum daily dose for your formulation. Maximum daily dose is very specific for the formulation, and maximum daily dose is required for the impurity specifications. I have made separate videos on maximum daily dose. You can go through those videos to have good understanding about the maximum daily dose as terminology used in the impurity specifications. So three thresholds are given by the ICH guideline, that is reporting threshold, identification threshold and qualification threshold. Based on these threshold limits and the maximum daily dose, the impurity specification can be given for known impurities and unknown impurities. The known impurity, that means it is well known, its structure is well known, and you can give a specific name to the impurity. You can give IUPAC name, or you can name it as impurity A or impurity B for your convenience. It is a specific impurity and it is specified by the name. An impurity or degradation product for which the structural characterization has been established, that is called as the known impurity. It is specified identified impurity. And unknown impurity, it don't have the specific name. An impurity or degradation product for which the structural characterization has not been established. The structure is unknown for this unknown impurity. And this impurity may be specified or unspecified. So now we will see what is specified and unspecified impurity. The specified impurity or degradation product, you can say. Then unidentified degradation product, unspecified degradation product. So first is specified degradation product. This is individually listed and limited with a specific acceptance criteria. It can be identified or unidentified. Many of the people confuse between these terminologies, so don't get confused. It is very simple. Specified means you are specifying it with some name or with some chromatographic values like retention time or relative retention time. Mainly the retention time is denoted, and if you are denoting with a retention time, it will become specified. So known and the impurity which is denoted by retention time becomes the specified degradation product or specified impurity. Then unidentified, this is unknown impurity. RRT based specification can be given, and that will become specified unidentified impurity, and it has structural characterization has not been achieved, and that is defined solely by qualitative analytical properties like chromatographic retention time. Then come to the unspecified degradation product. So this is unknown, it is not specified by any RRT or retention time. It is known as unknown impurity and unspecified unidentified impurity. Some of the people call it as single max unknown impurity. So from the list of unknown impurities, the impurity which is having the maximum concentration, that is taken as a single max unknown impurity, that is SMUI. Some people call it as any other unknown impurity. Some people may call it as any other unspecified impurity. This is limited by general acceptance criteria but not individually listed with its own specific acceptance criteria. So this is regarding the specified, unspecified, identified, unidentified and known and unknown impurities. Now we will take a practical example so that you will be very clear on how to set the acceptance criteria or how to set the specification or how to set the limit for impurity. So you take an example of tablet formulation of 200 mg, and as per the reference product PIL, The maximum daily dose is 200 mg. The product is available is only one strength, and one tablet per day is indicated. This is a hypothetical example, and I am giving you this example only for your easy understanding. Now you open the ICH guideline and go for reporting threshold. So dose is 200 mg, and thus reporting threshold will be 0.1%. This is very simple. Maximum daily dose is 200 mg and threshold is 0.1%. So directly you can take the 0.1%, and 0.1% of the 200 mg will become 0.2 mg. Always have this calculation in mind, that you have to convert percentage into mg and mg into percentage. Now you have set the limit for reporting threshold. Now come to the identification threshold. Identification threshold is for the unknown impurity. Whatever the limit, whatever the impurities are unknown, you can give the limit of identification threshold for the unknown impurities. Now the dose is 200 mg, and here the limit of 10 mg to 2 gram is 0.2% or 2 mg TDI, whichever is lower. Whichever is lower is the very important terminology. And daily intake, total daily intake criteria is 10 mg to 2 gram, and our daily dose is 200 mg. So now calculate the 0.2% of 200 mg, and simply it is 0.4 mg. Now the second criteria, or 2 mg. So 2 mg for 200 mg will become 1%. Now come to the third criteria, whichever is lower. So three criteria you can divide for your easy understanding. This is the first criteria, this is second criteria, and third criteria is whichever is lower. So now 1% is lower or 0.2% is lower. So yes, 0.2% is lower, and that's why the limit of 0.2% can be given for identification. Now your formulation is having a identification threshold of 0.2%. If impurity is below 0.2%, then its identification is not required. Otherwise, its identification will be required. Now come to the qualification threshold. The dose is 200 mg, and here the criteria is 0.2% or 3 mg, whichever is lower. 0.2% of 200 mg is 0.4 mg, and 3 mg for 200 mg is 1.5%. Again, here 0.2% limit is lower, and hence limit of 0.2% will be given for qualification threshold. So considering the daily dose of 200 mg, the identification threshold and the qualification threshold will be same. For the formulations with higher dose, these limits will be different. For the formulations with lower dose, the limit will be different. Also understand that whenever the dose is higher, the limit will be stringent. If the dose is lower, that time the limit will be little bit relaxed or will be higher. I cannot say that relaxed limits are there, but for your understanding only, I am saying that the limits are higher. You can see here for dose of 10 mg, 1% or 50 microgram is given. 10 mg to 100 mg, 0.5% or 200 microgram is given. 100 mg to 2 gram, 0.2% is given. So this percent will be less as the dose is increasing. Then we will see the practical example for giving specification. Now you have qualification threshold in your hand, you have identification threshold in your hand, you have reporting threshold, and you have the impurity list. Now you have, for example, two impurities as known impurities, impurity A and impurity B. Then you have single maximum unknown impurity, that is single max unknown impurity, SMUI, and the total impurity. So this will make your specification. Impurity A is a process impurity, impurity B is a degradant impurity, and impurity unknown impurity, that is SMUI impurity, is a degradant impurity. Then total impurity is sum of all the impurities. Now you have listed from the API COA that the vendor has given limit of not more than 0.1% for impurity A and impurity B, and API vendor has given a limit of 0.15% for single max unknown impurity and 1% for total impurities. Now in your product, the impurity A is not required as it is a process impurity. If it is a process impurity plus degradant impurity, then it is required to be included in the product specification. And now the impurity B, single max unknown, and total impurity will make the impurity specification part. So as you have the qualification limit of 0.2%, so it is given for the known impurity. Then you have identification threshold limit of 0.2%, it is given for the unknown impurity. So impurity B limit will become 0.2%. In the similar way, single max unknown impurity will have a limit of 0.2%. And the total impurities, as per the current guidelines, the total impurity should be summation of these two impurities, that means it should be 0.4%. But this is not the case in practical, as there will be impurities which are not listed here but will constitute the part of total impurities. Then come to the product stability and shelf life limit. So the same limits for impurity A and B are required to be given, and this is why, because these are the stringent limits for these two impurities, and the total impurity of 0.2%, total impurity of 2% is given in stability and shelf life specification, as the total impurity may be increased because of degradation impurities during stability. Now here you see the specification limit for release is given as not more than 0.2 for impurity B, single max with impurity of 0.2%, and total impurities of total impurities 1.5%. So this is based on the guidelines and based on the literature. If stringent limits are given for known impurities or unknown impurities or total impurities as per the monographs, then those stringent limits are required to be followed. If the monograph mentions the higher limit for example impurity B, then you can take those take those impurities also. For example, if the monograph mentions limit of 0.5% for impurity B, you can take that limit, because as a monograph that limit can be taken. Also understand here, always you should not go for the relaxed limit. If monograph mentions the relaxed limit or higher limit, that's why you should not select that limit. Always have a impurity specification which is supported by the development data. Otherwise, if you are going with relaxed limits, regulatory agency will ask you to stringent the limits based on the real-time data. Now come to stability and shelf life specification. You have given the same specification for the impurity B and unknown impurity in release and the shelf life. And at total impurities, you have given higher limit for stability shelf life specification. 1.5% at release and 2% at shelf life. With this specification, you went to prepare the exhibit batches or the qualification or validation batches, and you have loaded the batches onto stability and you got the data. So you got is with the specification limit of 0.2%, you got 0.001%, then 0.2%, 0.02% and 0.05%. Similarly, in the stability studies, whether you call it as accelerated or intermediate or the real time, generally the limits are given on the basis of real time data. So you consider it as a 2 years data, stability data for 3 batches, and consider the highest values. This is the data of 25-60 degrees Celsius for 2 years. This is a hypothetical example I am giving you. So here you got much lower limits, and if you submit this data, the regulatory agencies will tell you or ask you to tighten the limits as the impurities are not being generated. And if impurities are not being generated, that time the regulatory bodies will ask you to tighten the specification limits. Also, this real-time data will support you to have the exact specification, and that is before approval. Once you tighten the specification limits and once the regulatory authority approves those specifications, then you cannot change the specifications before prior approval from the regulatory bodies. So this is regarding the impurity specification in general. I have made other videos also on impurities, so go through that videos to have the clear understanding about the impurities. So in this video I have covered mainly how to set the specification limit. Now another thing I want to tell you that if any impurity is a degradation product and it is also a significant metabolite, so that time you can give higher limit for that specific metabolite impurity and you should submit the scientific data. Also, if any impurity is going beyond the qualification threshold, then that impurity is required to be qualified, and based on the qualification level and the actual data for that impurity during initial analysis and during stability studies, the limit can be given. Also, agency will ask for the data in different packs whichever you have loaded onto stability, and will tell you to control the impurities. So regulatory queries are always asked onto the impurities. Also, if the impurity levels are not justified or not discussed, if scientific rationale is not provided, that time the agency may refuse to receive your application. That is known as refuse to receive or RTR in the US market, or it is denoted as RTR by the US FDA. So regulatory queries are like to tighten the impurity limits based on the data at initial release and shelf life stage specification. Rationale for including the impurity and not including the impurity. If any impurity is a process impurity and it is also degradant, and if the applicant is not including that impurity in the specification, that time the agency will tell you to give rationale for the inclusion or exclusion. Then justification for the impurity limit and the specification will be asked. Qualification of impurities if above the qualification limit. Identification of impurities if above the identification limit. So these are the generalized queries. Lack of impurity justification and control can lead to the RTR. So this is regarding the setting specification for known, unknown and total impurities for release and shelf life. Known impurities will have qualification threshold as a limit. Unknown impurities will have identification threshold as a limit. Total impurities will be specified, or specification limit will be given for total impurities based on to the summation of all the impurities and the real time data. Release specification will be having a tighter control, and the shelf life specification will have the specification limits based on to the shelf life data. So this topic is very important to understand. Also, there is a MAP guideline for total impurity specification, and I have denoted here as a reference. This reference you can take and study it. Then ICS topic Q3A guidelines are there for impurity testing. Whenever you are working onto the product, that time from the initial stage, you should understand the impurities, how these are formed. You understand the degradation pathways or impurity generation pathways, and based on that you provide the limits from initial to the final batches. Always have rationale for the impurity specification. Always have literature in your hand for reference purpose. Keep on checking the monographs availability. If you are working onto the formulation for first year and in second year you come to know that now the USP has included a monograph, so comply to that monograph. Whether that monograph is in European Pharmacopoeia or US Pharmacopoeia, British Pharmacopoeia. So always understand those impurity specifications. So I hope this video will help you to understand the impurities and setting the limits for impurities. You can comment if you have any specific question or if you have any requirement for understanding, I will try to help to make you understand about the topic. I hope this topic will help you to understand and learn about the impurity specification. I am very happy to see the response from viewers, and it is like you people are getting benefited from my videos. So I am making many videos onto the different topics. My aim is to give the knowledge and understanding whichever I have understood and I have learned in my experience. Thanks for watching the video. Please do like, share and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.